They say a father's love has no limits. But what happens when the daughter you raise sells your name, your company, and your soul for a taste of fame? I taught her ethics, ambition, honor. She taught me one lesson in return: how deep betrayal can cut, and how truth can heal. My name is David Whitaker, and for most of my life I believed in two things: work and legacy. For 35 years I ran Whitaker & Sons Construction, a small but respected firm in Seattle, Washington. We weren't glamorous, but every skyline crane and timber beam carried a piece of my pride. My name on a permit meant something. It meant you could trust the work. And for decades, that trust was all I ever needed. Then I lost my wife, Margaret, to a stroke when our daughter, Emily, was 12. From that day forward, my entire world narrowed to one mission: raise that girl right. I learned how to braid hair with YouTube tutorials. I burned pancakes every Saturday morning but never stopped making them. And at night, when the city lights turned the window glass silver, I'd whisper to her, "You're my future Em. You're the best part of me." She'd laugh and say, "Then you better not mess me up, Dad." I didn't know that one day those words would sound like a warning. Emily was brilliant from the start. She could calculate roof angles faster than my foreman. She got into Stanford School of Business on a scholarship, and I sold a property to cover the rest. When she graduated, I thought the world had just handed my company a second lifetime. In 2018, she came home to Seattle with a man named Brandon Keller. Sharp suit, sharper smile. "Dad," she said, "Brandon sees potential in Whitaker & Sons. He wants to help us scale." Brandon shook my hand like he was sealing a merger, not meeting family. "Mr. Whitaker, construction is ripe for modernization. With our capital and Emily's leadership, you could go national." Something in his tone felt rehearsed. Too clean. Too confident. But Emily's eyes glowed with purpose. So, against my instincts, I agreed to a partnership. I signed over 25% of the company to their new venture, Whitaker Innovations LLC. They promised growth, sustainability, and media exposure. At first, everything they touched turned to gold. Press releases. Podcast interviews. Seattle Business Weekly ran a headline: "Father-daughter duo reinvent construction for the green age." I watched her on local TV, wearing a hard hat that still had our logo on it, and my chest swelled with pride. Maybe this was what legacy looked like. But in the reflection of the TV screen, I caught something I'd missed: Brandon's hand resting on her shoulder like ownership. Success changes people slowly, the way rust eats metal from the inside. At first it's invisible, just a new office, new staff, new words like vertical integration and equity leverage. Then one day you realize the structure you built doesn't feel like yours anymore. By spring 2021, Whitaker Innovations had moved into a glass-paneled tower downtown. They replaced my old wooden sign with a chrome logo that looked like it belonged on a tech startup, not a builder's yard. During one investor pitch, Emily interrupted me mid-sentence. "Actually, my father is semi-retired now," she said brightly. "I handle all operational strategy." The room chuckled. I felt my throat tighten. Afterward I pulled her aside. "Since when am I semi-retired?" She sighed, tapping at her phone. "Dad, investors want a clean story. Your legacy, I'm future. Don't take it personally. Legacy. Future." Funny how those words can't exist in the same tense. That night I stayed late in the office alone. The building hummed with the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. I stared at the new logo on the wall and whispered, "Margaret, I think we raised a stranger." Still, I kept showing up, every morning at 6, coffee in hand, hoping she'd remember who taught her to dream. Autumn crept into Seattle the way it always does: quiet rain, gray mornings, streets slick like mirrors. That November, Emily was nominated for the Puget Sound Innovator of the Year award. When the invitation arrived, embossed in gold, I almost didn't go. But some part of me, the father who still believed in her, pressed the suit I'd worn at her college graduation and drove downtown. The ballroom glimmered with chandeliers. Business leaders in black ties toasted one another over champagne. And there she was, Emily, radiant in a navy gown, standing beside Brandon as cameras flashed. When she spotted me, her smile faltered for half a second. Then she turned back to the stage. During her acceptance speech she said, "My father taught me about hard work, but success requires evolution. Sometimes you have to build beyond the old foundations." Polite applause. Every word felt like a nail in my chest. After the ceremony I slipped outside into the drizzle. Brandon followed, grin gleaming under the streetlight. "No hard feelings, old man," he said. "You should be proud. She's the face of the future." I wanted to punch that grin off his face. Instead I walked away. That was the night I realized pride had turned into pain. 2 months later, I found what they'd been hiding. It started with a simple invoice, a supplier charging double for steel beams. I called the manager. He said, "We haven't shipped to you in 6 months." I dug deeper. Every project file had been rewritten, renamed, streamlined. But I'd kept backups, the old-school paper kind. One evening in my home office surrounded by dusty blueprints, I compared them line by line. That's when I saw it. Payments wired to Keller Whitaker Holdings LLC, a company I'd never heard of. Registered in Nevada. No employees. Just a P.O. box and a single signer, Emily Whitaker. My hands shook as I scrolled through transfer after transfer. $75,000 here, $120,000 there. Over $1 million bled out of our accounts in 12 months. The next morning I confronted her. She looked up from her laptop, unbothered. "Dad, you're reading things you don't understand. It's capital repositioning." "Repositioning? You're stealing from clients who trust our name." She folded her arms. "You built a local brand. I'm building a legacy. Legacy doesn't come from fraud." Her expression hardened. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Brandon knows what he's doing. If you can't adapt, maybe you should step aside." That word, adapt, echoed like thunder. It was the same word I used to teach her how to survive storms on job sites. Now she was using it to justify drowning me. That night, I backed up every file, every email, every spreadsheet onto a flash drive and locked it in my safe. I didn't know if I'd use it, but I knew I'd need the truth someday. I found out the same way everyone else did, on the morning news. By the time I reached the office, federal agents were already there, taping evidence bags, collecting hard drives. Brandon and Emily were gone. That afternoon I got the call from a reporter. "Mr. Whitaker, do you have any comment on allegations that your company laundered investor funds?" My voice broke. My company didn't. My name did. 2 days later I was served papers listing me as a defendant, forgery, tax evasion, conspiracy. Every forged document carried my digital signature. I could have run. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Agent Daniel Rhodes, a contact from the Washington Financial Crimes Unit. "Agent Rhodes," I said, "I think my daughter framed me, and I can prove it." He came to my house that night. I handed him 3 boxes of evidence, contracts, invoices, flash drives. When he saw the duplicated signatures, he whistled low. "These are immaculate forgeries. Whoever did this knew your habits." He looked at me carefully. "You realize what you're doing? You're turning in your own daughter." I nodded. "She already turned me in first." Rhodes closed the folder. "All right, Mr. Whitaker. Let's expose them." For the next 6 months, my life became a string of interviews, subpoenas, and sleepless nights. Agent Rhodes and his team traced every invoice and email I had saved. Each breadcrumb led deeper into Brandon and Emily's digital maze: offshore accounts, fake subcontractors, ghost employees with stolen social security numbers. Sometimes the agents would ask, "Did she have access to this password?" Every time I had to answer, yes. They discovered an encrypted folder labeled Blueprint on Brandon's cloud drive. Inside were draft contracts and a note in Emily's handwriting. "Dad will sign when he sees the numbers." That note hit me harder than any accusation. She hadn't stumbled into this. She had planned it. When the warrant came through, the FBI raided Brandon's condo near South Lake Union. They found 2 servers, 6 external drives, and an envelope with passports and cash. The next morning, Brandon was in handcuffs. Emily turned herself in 3 days later, walking into a downtown precinct with sunglasses and a lawyer. The headline read, "Father's evidence leads to daughter's arrest in $3.4 million construction fraud." I didn't celebrate. I just sat at my kitchen table staring at Margaret's photo and whispered, "I'm sorry, honey. I couldn't save her." The courthouse smelled of coffee and rain-soaked wool. Reporters lined the steps. Inside, cameras weren't allowed, but the tension crackled like live wire. Emily sat 2 tables away in a gray suit that looked borrowed, hair tied back, face pale. Brandon looked like a man who'd already made peace with prison, cold eyes, jaw set. The prosecutor opened with one sentence that froze the room. "This case is not about greed, it's about betrayal." He presented the timeline, the transfers, the forged contracts. Each document carried my signature, copied with mechanical precision. When it was my turn on the stand, my hands shook. I told the jury about the company I'd built, the daughter I'd raised, the moment I realized she'd sold both. Then I said, "Integrity builds what money can't buy. Greed destroys it faster than a wrecking ball." People in the gallery gasped softly. Even Emily flinched. Her defense argued coercion, that Brandon had manipulated her. But Agent Rhodes produced emails that proved otherwise. One line burned into my memory. Once Dad's out of the way, we can flip the assets. When the verdict came, time slowed. Brandon Keller, 10 years federal prison. Emily Whitaker, 5 years, 3 suspended, restitution and probation. The judge looked directly at her. You defrauded investors, employees, and the man who gave you life. I hope you learn what real value means. I left the courtroom to flashes of cameras and shouted questions, but all I heard was my heartbeat. Justice didn't feel like victory, it felt like grief wearing a uniform. 2 months later, a local journalist called. Mr. Whitaker, would you consider telling your story on camera? People need to hear the truth. At first I refused. But the lies online, the blogs claiming I'd masterminded the scheme, kept spreading. So I agreed on one condition. They tell it exactly as it happened. We filmed over 3 weeks. They followed me through the empty workshop, the shuttered office, the house filled with boxes of evidence. I spoke about the night I found the forged transfers, the morning I watched federal agents seal my company's doors. When The Price of Legacy aired on regional television, I expected polite interest. Instead, it went viral. By the end of the week, national networks picked it up. Clips flooded social media, my voice saying, "Truth doesn't destroy families, lies do." Viewers called me brave. Others called me ruthless. Either way, they were listening. 3 days later, the producer called. "David, we got a statement from Emily. She wants to speak on camera." I hesitated, then said, "Let her." In the final episode, she appeared in a plain prison jumpsuit, eyes red but steady. "I thought I was smarter than him," she said. "But the truth doesn't bend, it breaks you." That single sentence changed everything. For the first time, the world saw her not as a villain, but as a fallen daughter facing herself. Within days, The Price of Legacy hit 40 million views. Seattle couldn't stop talking about it. Coffee shops replayed clips on silent TVs. Radio hosts debated forgiveness versus accountability. People started sending letters, hundreds at first, then thousands. Fathers thanking me for standing firm. Children admitting they'd once betrayed their parents for ambition. Investors offering to help rebuild my company. Even the city council invited me to speak about ethical practices in local business. When I walked into that chamber, the same officials who'd once avoided me stood and clapped. But revenge didn't feel sweet. It felt quiet. Like a wound finally scabbed over. Meanwhile, Emily's old interviews resurfaced. TED Talks, magazine spreads. Every boast about integrity now played side by side with her confession. One montage went viral, her saying, "My father taught me honesty," fading into a shot of the courtroom verdict. The internet named it #Whitaker lesson. It wasn't meant as cruelty, it became a shorthand for accountability. And me? I learned that when truth finally speaks, it doesn't need to shout. In October 2024, 2 years after the verdict, a knock echoed through my cabin on the outskirts of Seattle. Rain slid down the windows, the smell of pine filled the air. When I opened the door, Emily stood there, thinner, older, eyes rimmed red. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "I just wanted to see you." For a moment I couldn't move. There were 1,000 things I wanted to say, and none of them would have mattered. So I stepped aside. "Come in. It's cold." She sat at the kitchen table, twisting her hands. "I'm working at a hardware store," she said. "Minimum wage. I'm trying to pay back restitution." Her voice cracked. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to tell you I'm sorry." I studied her face, the same freckles, the same nervous twitch in her jaw, but the arrogance was gone. All that remained was a daughter who'd finally run out of places to hide. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said. "I don't expect you to," she whispered. "I just wanted you to know I remember Mom. She wouldn't have liked who I became." That broke something in me. We talked until the rain stopped, about everything except the crime. When she left, she looked back once from the driveway. For the first time in years, I waved. Winter came. Every week a postcard arrived from her, sometimes a photograph of a half-finished deck, sometimes a quote she'd underlined from a book. Each one ended with the same line, "Still building one day at a time." By spring she started volunteering on weekends, helping Habitat-style crews rebuild homes lost to a brush fire east of the Cascades. A local paper ran a story. Convicted developer lays foundations for others. People sent me the link asking if she was my daughter. I always answered yes. One Saturday I drove out unannounced. There she was in a yellow helmet, lifting lumber with 2 volunteers half her age. She looked up, startled, then smiled, hesitant but real. I picked up a hammer and joined her crew. We didn't talk much. The rhythm of nails hitting would set everything. That day taught me something strange. Revenge may satisfy the mind, but forgiveness feeds the soul. In 2025, a nonprofit called the North Sound Housing Initiative reached out. They wanted to resurrect my old company's principles as a community foundation for ethical building. They asked if I would lend my name. I agreed on one condition. It wouldn't be Whitaker and Sons anymore. It would be the Whitaker Foundation for Integrity in Building. And Emily would start not as a partner, not even as staff, but as a volunteer. She accepted instantly. Her first day, she arrived before dawn, sweeping the workshop floor just like she had as a teenager. I stood in the doorway watching her hum to herself and realized the storm had finally passed. When our first project, a row of affordable cottages for single parents, was completed, the mayor invited us to cut the ribbon. Under a cloudy Seattle sky, Emily stepped to the microphone. "This foundation isn't my redemption," she said. "It's my debt. Every brick here repays the man who taught me what honesty costs, and what forgiveness is worth." The crowd applauded. She looked at me through tears and I felt something loosen in my chest. When I hugged her afterward, it wasn't to forget. It was to begin again. They say betrayal never truly heals. Maybe that's true. But I've learned that truth cuts deeper only until you decide to stop bleeding. Emily and I still have scars. They remind us where we went wrong. But they also remind us that even broken structures can hold weight if the foundation is rebuilt right. If you've made it this far, remember this. Revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it's rebuilding your life so strong the ones who doubted you must look up to see you. My name is David Whitaker and this was my story. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us reach 5,000 subscribers and keeps real stories of betrayal, truth, and redemption alive. Because here on Revenge Uncut, every scar tells a story. And every story proves one thing. The truth always rebuilds what lies try to destroy.